This is a project that I've been teasing for quite a while, ever since my video talking about Sony's crusade on censoring Japanese video games. I made 2 videos on that, link down below. I have an idea of building a budget gaming PC for under $1,000 that can play all of the best Japanese games at 1080p 60fps. That is until I got a bit overboard with the budget, and now it's no longer a budget build. It's a legit mid-range PC for $890 that I will probably use to play higher end games that my 1050 laptop just cannot play. But the problem with this mid-range PC is that I got a bit overkill with some of the components to the point where for $890, this build is not very well optimized. And by that, I mean with a budget of $890, you can do so much better with this build. There's a reason why this build has turned out this way. So let me get the story here before we actually get into the parts. This build was initially planned to be a $750 build, and I ended up with $763 total, which is fine. I bought all of the respective components, but a generous $500 Canadian donation or $375 USD from my viewer Oren has made me to spend an additional money in other hardwares that are not really that necessary, to be honest. So this is originally a $763 build if it was upgraded with additional unnecessary storage and cooler for around $130 or so. If you think that the $890 could have been spent in better GPU and CPU, I agree, but I have already bought the GPU and the CPU for the $750 build, so it's a little too late for actually upgrading the system. But still, we'll get to optimizing this build later. For now, let's talk about the actual build. But before we go on any further, I want to give a huge shout out once again to Oren for the insane $500 Canadian donation. You are absolutely fantastic. Also, this project is brought to you by my wonderful patrons at Patreon. You can support this channel for just $1 a month, link down below. Huge thanks to my new patrons, Carlos and Leah. You guys are fantastic. So how did we get into this point? Well, let's check out the PC in question and examine the parts that I bought one by one. Again, this is originally a $763 build, upgraded with additional storage and a new cooler, which in total turns it into an $890 unoptimized mess. I will give you recommendations for each and every PC part as we get through the video, and I will also optimize this build for a much better rig for $900. This is my very first PC build, and I did encounter quite a lot of mistakes. I will mention them as we get along so that you don't repeat the same mistakes. Let's start off with the case. This is a Cougar MG110W Gaming Mini Tower case, a case that is not too big but not too small either, just the right size for my gaming desktop. This case has 2 audio jacks in the front, one USB 2.0 and one USB 3.0 in the front. I would love for this case to have 2 USB 3.0s in the front instead, but well, that's the risk of a cheap case. The side window for the case is not tempered glass, it's definitely acrylic, and looking at the inside of the case, we do have one pre-installed 120mm fan, a disk drive bay, and some really nice room for cable management and more fan support. I bought this case for around $35. Yes, this case is pretty damn cheap, and I can opt for a much better case, but unfortunately the big brand case like your NZXT or Fractal Design are not only pretty hard to find here, but they're also really expensive. I don't want to invest too much to the case, to be honest. What I look out for a PC case is if I can do some cable management and if there are enough airflows and places to put extra fans. And thankfully, this case is built for cable management. There is enough room to stuck in all the cables. There are holes where I can route the cables from one place after another, which would be a pretty challenging and fun thing to do. And couple this with my non-modular PSU, and it would be a really fun thing to do. If you're in the market for a new PC case, I highly recommend checking the airflow capabilities, cable management potentials, making sure that it's compatible with your preferred motherboard, and check out the front panel IOs too. I would also recommend spending a bit more than $50 for a case. At $35, this case is okay at best. Check them all out before buying your case. The motherboard for this PC that I use is an Asus Prime A320MK motherboard. This motherboard is not exactly a popular choice for the Ryzen builders because it lacks any capabilities of overclocking and the market value is not that great. But thankfully, I'm not planning to overclock my PC at all. I'm not really good at overclocking anyway, so I am pretty much okay with this motherboard. And the motherboard is also super cheap. It costed me around $65 for this motherboard alone. The capabilities for this motherboard are incredibly basic, but hey, we're aiming for base clocks here anyway and not looking for anything special. To the viewers, if you're looking for a Ryzen AM4 chipset motherboard, the A320 motherboards are the absolute bare minimum, and you're not going to be using this for overclocking. If you want to overclock your PC on a budget, I highly recommend the B350 motherboards. It offers balance between overclocking capabilities and budget builders. Just don't expect to do dual graphics configurations here. I don't recommend dual GPUs anyway, even if you have thousands of dollars to spare. Also, an important thing to note about these motherboards, if you're aiming to use Ryzen 2nd gen processors like a Ryzen 3 2200G or Ryzen 5 2400G or above, make sure that your motherboard is compatible. A lot of A320 or B350 or X370 motherboards are incompatible with the Ryzen 2000 series processors out of the box. You have to install a Ryzen 1000 series processors first, update the BIOS, then you can use these motherboards with the 2000 series processors. But if you don't know how to flash a new BIOS, you can just buy a B450 or an X470 motherboard, which will work out with the 2000 series processors right out of the box. Also, some 1000 series motherboards are shipped with an updated BIOS, so you should have an AMD Ryzen 2000 series ready sticker in the packaging, which means exactly what it says in the tin. So again, keep this one in mind if you're in the market for Ryzen motherboards. The CPU for this build is a Ryzen 5 1500X. Now initially I was going with the 4-core 4-threads Ryzen APU, the Ryzen 3 2200G, but people tell me that since I'm not using the Vega GPU built in the processor, I should just get the Ryzen 5 1400 anyway. You get more threads and probably less expensive. That's a pretty solid suggestion, I have to admit. Now the previous PC parts are the parts that I bought from a local computer store, but this is the one that I bought online because the computer store mostly sells the 2nd series Ryzen CPUs and they're pretty expensive because of the Vega GPU built in, or at least the 2400 down anyway. I did look out online in my local Indonesian online shops for 1st gen Ryzens, and thankfully there are still people who sell them. The price for a Ryzen 5 1400 online here is around $141. Then I found a magnificent deal for a Ryzen 5 1500X for just $7 more. I thought that this CPU is used, but it's not. It's actually pretty freaking new, so I got lucky with this one. For my personal recommendation at this moment, compared to the Intel processors, the Ryzen CPUs are honestly the best bang for the buck. Sure, the Intel processors are beating Ryzen in per-core performance, but if you're on a budget, the Ryzen CPUs offer excellent performance that will be very suitable for your needs. Not only that, but they also came in with their own Rave coolers, which are actually pretty damn good coolers all around. These coolers are pretty damn good for the base clocks of all of these AMD CPUs. If you're in the market for a CPU, you're on a tight budget, and you don't want to spend more money on a graphics card, honestly, the Ryzen 5 2400G is an all-around excellent APU. And I say APU because this is a CPU with a Radeon Vega 11 graphics card built in. You don't need another graphics card for this build. You can just put the CPU and play. You're not exactly going to play the latest graphically demanding titles for this, but you can play games that are not too graphically demanding, like Fortnite or Overwatch at 1080p 60 FPS just fine. At medium settings, sure, but that's an acceptable compromise if you ask me. You can even play some Japanese games that are not too graphically demanding in this rig. I will probably be testing this Ryzen 5 2400G for an ultra budget build for Japanese video games in the future, but for now, let's focus on this rig. For the GPU, I initially planned to build with an RX 560. The 560 cost about $130 here, and once again, I am saved by online deals. I managed to find a Sapphire Nitro Plus RX 570 for $190. I looked around for the retail price for this and found out that in Amazon, it's been sold for brand new for around $250. I am incredibly lucky to get this deal. This GPU is not only more than enough to play all the Japanese games that I'm gonna be playing, but can also play the latest AAA releases, and it's VR ready. I cannot wait to test this GPU, especially with the Oculus Rift, if I can get myself one of those. For the viewers, if you want to get yourself a good GPU, please make sure to Google the benchmarks of each respective GPU and make sure that they are able to run the games that you want. NotebookCheck is a great website that hosts quite a lot of benchmarks for different GPUs out there, so go check that website out if you want to know more details on the GPUs that you want. For the RAMs, we have ourselves 2 sticks of 8GB Team Group Elite Plus RAMs at 2400 MHz. Not really that fast, I know, but I'm not aiming for too much speed, and I'm okay with lower frequencies for now. I bought the RAMs in the store and they costed $75 each, which means they're $150 total. Yes, the RAMs are getting pretty expensive these days. I chose 16GB of RAM because 16GB is really becoming the recommended standards for both gaming and productivity. More and more games these days require 8GB of RAM as minimum, so it's recommended for you to get yourself 2 sticks of 8GB 256GB RAMs. As for the frequency and the speed, it depends on your motherboard and whether or not the speeds are compatible, so go consult your respective motherboards for that. Also, another thing to note, I've heard that Ryzen is not really that good in handling quad-channel memory, so keep that in mind as well. The PSU is an EVGA 450 watts 450BR, which is 80 plus certified bronze. It's a pretty high quality PSU from a respectable brand, but it's going to be a challenge to implement because it's a non-modular PSU, which means that all of the cables are already attached to the PSU and it's going to be a nightmare. I want myself some challenge as well, and it's not necessarily impossible to cable manage non-modular PSUs, it's just gonna be a little bit more difficult. For the viewers, there are many types of PSUs, but regardless of whether or not it's modular, make sure that they are 80 plus certified and make sure that they come from respectable brands. As for the wattage that you need, there are many power supply calculators online, such as this one from EVGA. They will immediately point you out to the power supply that is right for your system. So go check that out if you want to know how much watt that you need for your system. Storage is where I got a bit overkill. Now, initially the plan was to install most of the games on the hard drive and the OS and the SSD. So I have a Seagate Barracuda 1TB HDD and one Samsung X60 EVO M.2 250GB SSD. But thankfully, with the donation from my viewer, I can skip the placeholder and just buy myself another 500GB Samsung X60 EVO SATA SSD. And then when I bought that, I realized, well, why didn't I just buy a Samsung X60 EVO 500GB SSD in the first place and just skip over the 1TB HDD? Yeah, I didn't think of that. I was an idiot. If you're in the market for PC building and you're on a budget, thankfully high capacity SSDs are not only faster, but they're also cheaper. So get yourself a 500GB SSD and probably upgrade that storage later on, or just use external hard drives for storage. That's also fine. And finally, the cooling solution. Now, the reason why I chose Ryzen and the reason why you should choose Ryzen in my opinion is because Ryzen processors came with the Rave coolers, which are pretty damn good if you're not aiming to overclock. I'm not aiming to overclock, so I would just stick to the box cooler. Or at least I would. I ended up buying myself a Deepcool Gamma XX 400 CPU cooler that is equipped with a blue LED. I also bought myself 5 120mm Deepcool fans, which also have blue LEDs in them. Yes, I do want the blues. And I think those are all the respective PC parts that I build. Well, I do have one little aesthetic change, but I found out that it's not as good as I thought, so I scrapped that entirely. Like I said at the beginning, for $890, this is not an optimal build. I spent way too much on storage, and I already explained that I bought all of the $763 parts before I actually get to the really generous donation. It was a little bit too late to optimize that build at the time. So if you have, say, $850 as your budget and you have it now, this is not an optimal build. There are definitely many things that can be optimized. So I will get to the optimized version of this build and one that is definitely more bang for the buck. First off, let's remove the hard drive and the M.2 SSD. We're gonna be just using the 500GB SSD. Then I replaced the Ryzen 5 1500X with a Ryzen 5 1600X. That's a 6-core CPU as opposed to the 4-core CPU. And just like the previous Ryzen, the included Rave cooler is pretty damn good. And since we're not aiming to overclock anyway, we can just knock the cooler out of the way. Another thing that can be optimized is the graphics card. You can definitely get yourself an RX 580 Nitro Plus 4GB GDDR5. Much better graphics card and better for VR as well. And in total, this would be an $858 PC. A little bit more than a target, but hey, that's not too excessive. Also, one thing to consider, these are all Indonesian prices, which means that it's probably gonna be a bit more expensive compared to the Western counterparts. Overall, you can probably get a lot of the parts cheaper in the West, but I don't know. I have all the tables here and you can try to compare the prices by yourself and see if the prices are matching up with the West. The building process of this PC took me an entire night from 8 PM to midnight. This is my very first PC build ever, so a lot of the building consists of frustrations after many manual readings and so forth. Even with the knowledge that I got from games like PC Building Simulator and many YouTube videos I watch about building your own PCs, there are still many things that I have to research. I'm not gonna get to the specifics of the building process, or at least not yet. But if you're just getting into PC gaming and you want to build your own PCs, there are 5 general tips that I learned that I will share to you guys. Number 1, don't just read or watch online step-by-step instructions, especially from The Verge. You can definitely start out building your PCs with YouTube videos and having a YouTube companion video at hand, but for the most part, building the PC involves consulting the manual of each and every part of the PC. Even if you spend 80 plus hours on PC Building Simulator, you still need to consult your manual to make sure that you get all the parts running. That's not to say that watching the videos do not help. They absolutely do. It's just that, well, you can't just depend on them entirely. Number 2, do not ignore cable management. Even if you know where to put things together, cable management is crucial to maintain good airflow and prevent dust. So keep this one in mind as you're building, and most importantly, get yourself a case that allows you to do that. Terrible cases usually don't offer much in cable management. Number 3, research your parts. When you're building a PC, you need to make sure that you research your PC parts so that they will fit not only in your case, but for your needs as well. You can use websites like PC Part Picker to pick the parts for your PC. The website also will tell you incompatibilities between the parts and even calculate the required wattage for your power supply. But it's not just PC Part Picker that you need to worry about. Make sure that all of these PC parts will meet your requirements in what kind of games that you want to play and what kind of things that you want to do on your PC. Number 4. Put front panel cables first. Front panel cables are freaking annoying to put, so put them first or else you will regret them later. 5, and the most important tip, consult your manuals. They are very informative, especially when you're just building PCs for the first time. And when I say manuals, I mean all manuals. Your CPU cooler, the case manual, the motherboard, etc. Most PC parts always come with their own manuals. If you somehow lost them, don't worry. The manuals are available online as well. And interestingly, every step-by-step PC building tutorial video also suggests that you have to consult the manual anyway. So again, have the manual ready and try not to lose them. With all of that process, I have successfully finished my project. All of the components are connected very well, and now it's time for the moment of truth. Will this thing actually boot? Moment of truth. 3, 2, 1. Unfortunately, first try and this thing does not boot. Turns out that the motherboard does not receive power from the PSU and I didn't slot the motherboard power cable correctly. So now that the motherboard's LED turned on, signaling that it received power, I press the button again. Oh, come on! Oh, come on! I suspected that this entire thing is because I put the front panel cables wrong. Turns out I was right. Again, these front panel cables are freaking annoying as hell. Put them in as soon as possible. So after reseating the entire thing, I decided once again to test the moment of truth. It's time to see if this thing's gonna run. Oh! Oh! It runs! And it lives! Oh! Yes! It's like hearing your baby for the first time. To see your creation finally come alive and is going to be able to provide a great gaming experience, it's just freaking insane. All of that manual reading and 4 hours of frustrating components fitting has finally paid off into a really satisfying conclusion. The blue LEDs on the PC just made this entire thing so much better and more personal. I do like myself some blues. One thing that baffles me is that once I installed the graphics driver, AMD recognized this RX 570 card as an RX 580. I consulted GPU-Z and GPU-Z practically said the same thing, even though GPU-Z showed 2048 shaders while the 580 has 2304 shaders. This is probably because this Sapphire Nitro Plus GPU is factory overclocked and my Adrenaline drivers read the base clock for my RX 570 as 1340 MHz, which is actually the turbo boost clock for an RX 580. That, or maybe they install the custom BIOS so that it reads RX 570 as an RX 580. I don't know. Also, another thing to note, my PSU does not have enough Molex cables for all the fans that I need to plug in, and my motherboard has only one case fan slot, so I ended up buying myself one of those Molex splitters. I heard that they're not very good, but I'm only using this to give power to 2 of my exhaust fans. As long as you don't overkill the splitter, you should be just fine. Now, those are all the parts and the building process. Let's get into the benchmarking. As promised, I'll be using this rig for testing Japanese games, but I can't test all of them due to time constraints and the fact that I don't have all of the games that I promised to test, and that unfortunately includes Senran Kagura. Not that I'm interested to play Senran Kagura in the first place, but still, we do have Japanese games in here, and I do have those that have a hefty system requirements. The first one on the chopping block is Nier Automata. Now, yes, Nier Automata is not a great PC port, and that is a valid criticism, but it is still a pretty demanding game for one, and for two, the game runs much more stable with the fixed Automata resolution patch, or the FAR patch, which has a very simple and easy installation process. I will link you guys to not just the guide on how to install FAR, but also tweak the game settings so that it runs pretty well. To sum up the guide, you have to disable anti-aliasing because the game's ambient occlusion already has anti-aliasing in there, which is really weird. And you can't just install FAR, you have to open FAR's control panel, which you can do by pressing these buttons and set global illumination to high, which will boost your performance with very little to no visual impact. And after that, the game runs absolutely amazing. At 1080p high settings, the game runs at a really damn consistent 60 FPS. It almost rarely drops below 60, and even if it does, it only drops about 2 or 3 frames at most. The next one is Monster Hunter World. The game still rocks some pretty solid frame rate at 1080p high settings. It's not exactly a consistent 60 FPS frame rate, but the game should be running at above 50 at least most of the time. You can probably even tone the settings down to medium so that you can get a more consistent 60 FPS, or just tune down the resolution to 900p. Let's just not go to 720p. In this case. The next one is Ni no Kuni 2. This is a surprisingly demanding title. The recommended requirements for this game is a Core i7-3770, a GTX 970, and 8GB of RAM. You now see why 8GB of RAM is not enough for games these days. Thankfully, this machine is able to run Ni no Kuni 2 just fine with 0 issues. The average frame rate is certainly acceptable for this title. My 1050 laptop is able to run this game just fine, so of course this PC is able to run the game just fine as well. Next up, Tekken 7. Now, Tekken 7 is pretty damn well optimized, but if you're gonna run this game at high settings, it still requires a pretty demanding machine. For the recommended requirements, Tekken 7 requires a GTX 1060 or higher. But Tekken 7 is actually a really well optimized game. Not only that, it runs absolutely fine on my 1050 laptop, but I'm able to max out most of the settings. The result for this one is a no-brainer. Tekken 7 on my machine is just absolutely perfect. And while I do have Soul Calibur 6, I won't be doing testing for that because the requirements for both games are largely the same. So if you're able to run Tekken 7 just fine, you are perfectly capable of running Soul Calibur 6 as well. And speaking of 7, let's test this one with a horror game, shall we? Resident Evil 7 is technically speaking a Japanese video game, and the requirements for this game are pretty steep. Thankfully, this game runs just absolutely fine at my 1050 laptop, and thus the results for my PC is as expected. I did cap the frame rate to 60 to keep stability. The game can run at higher frame rates, but 60 FPS is the one that we're aiming at the moment. The next one is an HD remaster of a really strange game called Resonance of Fate. This is originally a PS3 and Xbox 360 game, and let me tell you for sure that this is one hell of a strange game, and I'm really loving it so far. But damn, this game looks fantastic. It is definitely a 4K remaster, and I'm able to run this game just fine with a consistent 60 FPS in my 1050 laptop. That is until an update come in and the game's frame rate just went all over the place. This game ran smoothly at first, I can assure you, but for some reason now, it's running at below par FPS that I find quite surprising. It can even go way below 30 FPS, which is the scariest part. I thought this is an RX 570 issue, but this also happens in my 1050 after the update. Hopefully this port can get fixed as soon as possible. At least they're updating it as time went on. A very different case from Nier Automata. And last but not least, we have Yakuza 0. 0. Yakuza 0 is a PS4 title, and this PS4 title surprisingly doesn't really need that much. It is such a well-optimized game on the PC that it runs pretty damn well, not only in my 570 machine, but also my 1050 laptop as well, at max settings. I'm actually quite surprised by how this game turns out, so great job with the optimization, Sega. I am very proud of you. And those are all just the normal games that you'd play with a controller or a mouse and keyboard. This rig is VR ready, so I cannot wait to test this one with a VR peripheral. That is, if I have enough room to play these games in VR, and if your graphics cards are powerful enough for VR. I would also give you guys a more detailed step-by-step guide on building this machine with my brother in the future. So thank you guys so much for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for the never-ending support, both on my Patreon and by subscribing to the channel and watching my videos. Without you guys, I wouldn't have reached a point where I can build this amazing PC. So consider this PC a love child between you, my lovely fans, and me. God, that sounds weird.